your back. The ones who didn't fade quietly into the background, the ones who imploded from within, the ones who stopped arguing their case, the ones who simply ceased to participate. They're analyzing you now, not in therapy sessions or support forums. No, in sterile research facilities where psychologists specializing in thought reform huddle around monitors, desperately trying to decode exactly what mental maneuver you just executed on yourself. Because whatever internal shift you triggered, whatever cognitive switch you flipped in the depths of your own awareness, it accomplished something they've been attempting to engineer in controlled subjects for generations. And right now, they're documenting it, dissecting it, hoping to weaponize it. You understand, deprogramming specialists. These are professionals who dedicate their entire existence to liberating consciousness imprisoned by ideology. They counsel families shattered by doctrinal systems. They sit opposite individuals who've surrendered years, lifetimes, their complete sense of identity to organizations, figureheads, collectives that devoured them entirely. And these experts, they possess methodologies, strategies, evidence-based approaches that require months, often years, to generate results. But then they observed you. They witnessed your transformation, and it obliterated their models of how human consciousness escapes psychological domination because you bypassed their entire system. You required no intervention, no counseling, no peer recovery circles, no staged therapeutic dismantling. You accomplished something their literature claims is statistically impossible. You opened your eyes one random morning and just disconnected, not incrementally, not with skepticism building gradually across weeks. You examined the complete architecture of conviction you'd constructed your existence upon, the persona you'd maintained for years, the collective you'd sacrificed everything for, and you just retracted your investment like killing power to a machine. No theatrical departure, no published statement, no climactic showdown, just a silent, absolute surgical termination of your psychological allegiance to a framework that had stopped serving your truth. And everyone orbiting your life, everyone who had you categorized, understood, anticipated, they registered the change. They noticed the vacuum where your devotion used to exist. And it unsettled them more profoundly than any confrontation ever could, because confrontation they can process. Confrontation is visible, passionate, predictable. Confrontation confirms you remain emotionally invested enough to engage. But your move, this wasn't confrontation. This was elevation. You didn't challenge the apparatus. You simply revoked its jurisdiction over your mind. You observed the authorities, the teachings, the collective enforcement, the intimidation strategies, the guilt engineering, everything. And something in your neural architecture just shifted. Not through rage, not through betrayal, but through the most lethal realization a dominated consciousness can access. Wait, none of this holds actual power. None of this ever controlled me. I simply granted it permission. Now here's where the research gets fascinating. Deprogramming specialists conventionally operate externally inward. They attempt to generate uncertainty through contradictory evidence, through revealing coercive methodologies, through rebuilding connections to family, to previous memories, to existence before indoctrination. It's an approach of outside influence attempting to ignite inside examination. But you operated internally outward. You required no one to illuminate the inconsistencies because you began detecting structures. Structures in how the messaging adapted when politically necessary. Structures in which members faced consequences and which remained protected. Structures in the distance between proclaimed values and actual behavior. And once you perceived the structure, you couldn't reverse that perception. The researchers label this organic critical awareness emergence. In their journals and clinical documentation, they characterize it as exceptional, unpredictable, nearly impossible. They've recorded perhaps a dozen instances where someone deeply embedded in ideological capture just awakens without external catalysts. And each occurrence sends them scrambling to comprehend the mechanism, what initiated it, what enabled this individual's consciousness to achieve self-emancipation when thousands of comparable cases remain imprisoned. They examine you like you're a blueprint that could reveal a more efficient, more immediate path to rescuing people. Because if they can decode what transpired in your cognition, they might replicate it, systematize it, deploy it to liberate others. But here's what their sanitized terminology and academic frameworks won't acknowledge. What you executed wasn't merely remarkable, it was catastrophic. Escaping psychological domination isn't comparable to exiting a structure. It's comparable to regaining consciousness during surgery and discovering you've been performing the procedure on yourself. You didn't simply abandon a conviction system. You destroyed the iteration of yourself that required it. You sacrificed the collective that validated you, the mission that animated you, the absolute certainty that rendered existence navigable. And you accomplished this without preparation, without a substitute identity prepared, without anyone supporting you through the devastation. Most human beings cannot endure that magnitude of existential collapse. Most human beings require the previous framework to decay gradually while they construct alternatives. But you demolish the complete foundation in one instant of recognition and then remain standing in the wreckage, completely isolated, completely vulnerable, completely uncertain of your fundamental nature anymore. And somehow you resisted retreating into the security of the delusion. You didn't return to the collective pleading for reinstatement. You inhabited that destruction, that identity annihilation, that paralyzing freedom, and you refused to avert your awareness. The specialists, they're scrutinizing this component particularly. They need to understand what psychological profile can withstand that intensity of existential disorientation without regressing into the safety of familiarity. What creates someone capable of selecting the undefined over the predictable? What builds someone resilient enough to exist as no one temporarily? To possess no explanations, no collective, no manual, just unfiltered awareness attempting to distinguish authentic reality. And the conclusion disturbs them almost equally to how it captivates them, because the conclusion is suffering. The conclusion is that you'd already endured sufficient anguish inside the apparatus that the anguish of departure couldn't possibly exceed it. You see, they assumed they conditioned you into obedience. They assumed the humiliation, the psychological manipulation, the alienation techniques, the retribution for inquiry. They assumed all of that was maintaining your captivity. But what they failed to recognize is that every iteration of mistreatment, every instance of mental contradiction you were forced to internalize, every occasion you experienced that visceral warning in your body but suppressed it, all of that was cultivating something inside you. Not allegiance, not dedication, resistance. You were generating psychological defenses against their domination tactics. And when you finally reached your breaking threshold, when the internal suffering of remaining exceeded the terror of leaving, you didn't simply depart. You fundamentally restructured your complete relationship with conviction itself. Now, the deprogramming specialists are documenting something they're designating the sovereignty moment. It's that precise instant when a controlled consciousness suddenly comprehends it possesses the capacity to simply stop accepting, not through debate, not through being persuaded, but through the fundamental existential decision to revoke participation in a narrative. They're attempting to determine how to synthetically trigger this moment in individuals still trapped. They're designing interventions, philosophical exercises, interrogation frameworks, all engineered to guide someone toward that identical instant of absolute clarity you discovered independently. But here's the obstacle they continuously encounter. You cannot instruct someone to replicate what you achieved, because what you achieved demanded you sacrifice everything. It demanded you accept the elimination of your complete social ecosystem, your sense of meaning, your experience of significance, your certainty regarding existence. Most individuals aren't prepared for that exchange. Most individuals prefer inhabiting a comfortable fabrication than confronting an uncomfortable reality. But you examined the cost of liberation, and you paid it completely without deliberation. Not because you possess superior courage, but because you'd already dissolved so entirely inside the system that you possessed nothing remaining to defend. They're analyzing your cognitive patterns now, theoretically speaking, attempting to map the neural mechanisms that activate when someone selects genuine uncertainty over manufactured certainty. Because that's your choice. You selected not understanding over pretending comprehension. You selected disorientation over the performance of clarity. You selected psychological displacement over residing in a mental confinement disguised as sanctuary. And that decision, that singular devastating decision, it reconfigured something essential in your awareness that cannot be reversed. You cannot accept belief identically anymore. You cannot abdicate your critical analysis identically anymore. You cannot be controlled through identical tactics anymore because you've witnessed the machinery and there's no eliminating that knowledge. The experts discuss cognitive independence, the capacity of consciousness to self-govern without external ideological regulation. Most individuals never accomplish this because most individuals reject the accountability. Cognitive independence means you must determine independently what's legitimate, what's ethical, what's actual. It means you cannot attribute the authority, the doctrine, the collective when circumstances deteriorate. It means you're isolated with your decisions and their ramifications. But you seize that independence with complete commitment, despite it inflicting damage. You claimed possession of your own awareness, despite it requiring acknowledging you'd relinquished it for so long. Now here's what's transpiring in those research facilities. While they analyze your psychological architecture, they're recognizing that conventional deprogramming might be obsolete. They're recognizing that attempting to slowly, carefully guide someone from mental imprisonment might not represent the most effective methodology, because you demonstrated that sometimes the most direct path to freedom is through total confrontation. Sometimes the exclusive method to break free is confronting the complete horror of what you've enabled, what you've rationalized, what you've sacrificed for a lie, simultaneously. It's violent, it's devastating, but it's also instantaneous. There's no extended timeline of progressive questioning. There's just one moment of total recognition followed by a choice. And that choice, that's what they're desperate to comprehend. Because in that moment, when you saw through everything, you could have selected denial. You could have intensified your commitment to believing, manufactured new rationalizations, reinforced your dedication like countless people do when confronted with contradictions. But something inside you refused. Something inside you declared no. I'd prefer confronting reality, even if it annihilates me, than existing one additional moment in this fabrication. That's not typical human functioning. Typical human functioning prioritizes self-preservation, ego protection, psychological consistency regardless of cost. But you selected psychological obliteration and somehow emerged from it fortified. The specialists are designating you a spontaneous exit, someone who escaped ideological imprisonment through an internal mechanism they're still attempting to chart. They're interviewing individuals like you, accumulating narratives, identifying shared characteristics. And what they're discovering is that most spontaneous exits share specific attributes: exceptional intelligence combined with exceptional trauma, pattern recognition capabilities that eventually redirect inward, a threshold moment where the suffering of staying surpassed the fear of departing, and perhaps most critically, a capacity to exist completely isolated, to possess no identity, no collective, no certainty, to be psychologically exposed in a reality that demands you maintain a facade. But let's examine deeper into what actually occurred in your consciousness during that moment of severance. Because the external witness observes someone abandoning a group, severing connections, altering behavior. But internally, you experience something far more transformative. You experience what researchers call ego dissolution, without chemicals, without spiritual practice, without any of the conventional structures people utilize to facilitate that variety of metamorphosis. Your sense of self, the story you constructed about your nature, just disintegrated. And in that disintegration, you witnessed something most people invest their complete lives evading. You witnessed that self is fabricated, that identity is theatrical, that everything you assumed was actually just an assembly of convictions and performances you gathered to survive. This is where the deprogramming specialists become genuinely fascinated, because if you can initiate ego dissolution through pure observation, through simply seeing through your own psychological architecture, then you've accessed something that could transform how we comprehend consciousness and control. You've proven that the confinement is always mental, that the barriers are always beliefs, and that freedom is always accessible to anyone willing to confront the vertigo of existence without direction. But most people refuse. Most people cannot. The fear is too overwhelming, the uncertainty too consuming. They require the framework, the collective, the doctrine, the authority instructing them what to think and who to become. You stopped requiring it. Not because you discovered something superior, but because you saw through the requirement itself. You realized that your desperate compulsion to belong, to participate in something larger, to possess absolute explanations, that compulsion was being exploited against you. And once you saw the mechanism, once you comprehended how your own psychological vulnerabilities were being manipulated, you couldn't be controlled identically again. It's comparable to learning how illusions function. You can still observe the presentation, but you cannot be deceived by it anymore. The enchantment is permanently shattered. Now, the experts are attempting to teach this to other individuals. They're developing what they're calling awareness-centered intervention frameworks. Instead of attempting to debate someone from their convictions, instead of presenting evidence and alternative narratives, they're attempting to help people observe their own psychological structures. How do you react when your convictions are questioned? How do you feel when the collective expresses rejection? What occurs in your body when you contemplate departing? They're attempting to generate the conditions for people to experience their own moment of absolute clarity, their own spontaneous awakening to the mechanisms of their own imprisonment. But here's the ethical complexity they're confronting. What you endured, that moment of complete psychological disintegration. People experience breakdowns, people fragment. People develop acute anxiety and depression when their complete framework for interpreting reality suddenly collapses. You survived it. You integrated it. You emerged from it with your sanity preserved. But not everyone can. Some people require the gradual process, the incremental dismantling, the therapeutic infrastructure. Forcing someone into the variety of awareness you achieved could destroy them rather than liberate them. So the specialists are proceeding cautiously, attempting to determine who can handle the truth and who requires protection from it. What they don't discuss frequently, what makes them uncomfortable to acknowledge, is that you might be fundamentally distinct from the individuals they're attempting to help. You might possess a psychological resilience they cannot replicate or instruct. Because when everything collapsed, when you possessed no identity, no collective, no certainty, you didn't require someone to provide you a new framework. You were comfortable existing in the absence. You were comfortable not understanding. You were comfortable being undefined temporarily. And that's exceptional. That's almost unprecedented in their documentation. Most individuals emerging from ideological control immediately begin searching for a new system to embrace, a new collective to join, a new identity to assume. But you just inhabited the emptiness and learned to be comfortable with questions that possess no solutions. The deprogramming specialists are now examining something they're calling post-control awareness. It's the mental condition of someone who's liberated but hasn't substituted the previous system with a new one. Someone who's learned to function without ideological support. Someone who can tolerate ambiguity, who can maintain multiple contradictory concepts, who can change their perspective without it threatening their complete sense of self. And what they're discovering is that individuals who accomplish this condition, individuals like you, they become nearly impossible to manipulate ever again. Not because they're suspicious of everything, but because they comprehend how conviction operates, how influence functions, how their own consciousness can be affected. You've witnessed the source code. You've studied the manual. You understand all the techniques because you succumbed to them previously. This is what makes you so valuable to their research. You're not just someone who escaped. You're someone who comprehends the escape mechanism. You can articulate the psychological processes that most people who abandon groups cannot explain. You can describe the moment of severance, the sensation of the illusion fragmenting, the experience of selecting truth over comfort. And in your description, they're discovering insights, structures, methodologies they might be able to teach to others. But they're also discovering something that troubles them. They're discovering that what you accomplished might not be replicable because it required you to accept losing yourself completely. And that's not a capability you can teach. That's a desperation you can only experience. Let's discuss what transpired after the severance, because the moment of clarity, the moment of departure, that's dramatic. That's the peak of the narrative. But what follows, that's where the authentic work begins. You were suddenly outside the apparatus that had defined you for so long. No more daily practices, no more collective reinforcement, no more clear sense of mission, just you isolated attempting to determine who you are when you're not performing a role. And this is where most individuals fail. This is where most individuals retreat to the collective or immediately locate a new collective because the emptiness is intolerable. But you remained in that uncomfortable space. You permitted yourself to be undefined, incomplete, uncertain. The specialists call this the integration phase. It's when the individual has to construct a new sense of self from absolute foundation. But what they're learning from examining individuals like you is that perhaps the objective shouldn't be constructing a new rigid identity. Perhaps the objective should be learning to exist without requiring one, because every fixed identity, every solid sense of self, it's vulnerable to the identical manipulation tactics that got you trapped initially. Someone can always appear and offer you a superior story, a more attractive identity, a more certain worldview. But if you learn to be adaptive, if you learn to hold your sense of self loosely, if you learn to be comfortable not understanding exactly who you are, then you become uncontrollable. You become immune to the psychological tactics that control most.